Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Yellowstone Season 4, Episodes 3 and 4. So, going on into these episodes, it feels like we just have a bunch of small stories in here. Like, it kind of feels like they don't have a main goal for this episode besides the whole militia thing, which I call mercenaries, just because it's like, yeah, like, I don't think that these characters are going to be all that important, and come to find out they really aren't. Hence why I didn't really care to learn their names, because I'm like, dude, they're probably going to get wrapped up and killed off and whatever, like, so quickly that'll probably even be off camera, or they're going to find everybody and just wipe them out fairly easily. And that's pretty much what they did here. That's pretty much what goes on in this episode. But there is still some loose ends happening in this episode also, so we'll get into that. So, we, of course, in this episode, in one of these episodes, we kind of have Mo brings plenty. It's kind of interesting. We're starting to see more of this character, even to the point of like seeing his family for like a brief time. But it's interesting how like the smaller characters are kind of getting more like stuff to do here. And it's also interesting how like Travis seemed like a very small character, but it seems he's getting much more story. And Jimmy is seemingly getting much more story besides him just being tied into whatever the field hand mission thing is. Like, they're kind of giving him his own little spotlight, technically. It's interesting having kind of Casey do these random missions, and him also kind of dealing with his family in these episodes. We also have the aftermath of what the heck has Jamie been doing this whole time since the end of season 3 to now. And so we might come to a close of figuring out who had called up these militia members and who had gone on to kill this whole family off. And we're going to possibly see the aftermath of that. But then again, like, we could say that, like, oh, this has to happen, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not going to. Maybe we'll find out all along that, like, there's something wrong about here, and maybe we're going and thinking the story's to go some way, but it's, like, it's not. We can maybe say here. So, with that said, yeah, like there's a lot of side stuff. If anything, I'm probably not going to do this in the perfect way of this episode. More than likely, I'm just going to commingle the both of these episodes together. So if people want like the perfect variation of this, then just watch the show when I get into spoilers, because more than likely I am going to dip from the very first episode and then also talk about the other one, and then kind of finish up of whatever I left off to eventually go into the next episode. Because it also seems here that we have one story that ends up continuing into the next, and so like it just feels like they just need something to fill time right now. There's nothing for them to really do right now. It just feels like, hey man, we gotta just like we need some episodes to kill here. We need some time to fill. And that's what it feels like this show is right now. Just time to fill to get to a bigger event where you're like, oh. And so yeah, that's kind of what I feel about this show right now. Is it's just not as like good of a quality, but the little stories are still interesting. Like, there's certain things that people could like, oh, this was my favorite story of this episode kind of thing. So with that said, I think that's all I want to talk about for these episodes in a very cryptic like sense. I'll go in more in depth about the spoilers and so on and so forth. So let's go into it. Let's go into season 4, episode 3. I'm gonna bounce around a lot. It's not going to be at all like the episode. So if you're expecting me from like second to second, just like yeah, like that's not the exact thing that happens in the very. I'm gonna bounce around and you're gonna find that out. So let's go and cover Casey's stuff. So Casey's things. Casey is to, of course, in episode 3, go and meet a guy named Emmett. A guy who is to have a new neighbor that is to be farming llamas, weirdly. And Casey's like, well, what the heck are you doing with llamas? And the guy's like, well, I just wanted the tax break. He's like, of course, of course. So we have Emmett who is complaining about his California neighbor that this guy is to go on and put these cattle guards to make it very much more difficult for this guy to be able to drive his cattle to and from places, that he has to go and use his truck, which is much more expensive, and the prices that he's going to have to use for gas is just killing him right now. And so Emmett is hoping that Casey can resolve this somehow. And so Casey goes on to this guy's place and is to try and have this guy talk to him, and the guy could not bother. He's like, well, I want my attorney. And so Casey just breaks in there, grabs this guy named Ralph, drags him to this cattle guard, and is to say, it's like, well, hey, like what you're doing is technically against the law because it is to ruin this guy's easement. And so what I'm going to have you do, because Casey is to like zip tie this guy, he ends up chucking him into this cattle guard because it kind of has this kind of little kind of like dug up area. And so Casey just dumps this guy into this cattle guard and then drives off, leaving him there. And at some point later, Emmett is to drive over this part to hear his neighbor screaming for help. And Emmett's like, oh, like, what did he do? Oh my God. To where I think Emmett, like, we haven't had that real, like, what happens? What happens after that? Like, is Emmett gonna go and like, hey, Casey, like, thanks for... Maybe they rescued the guy. Maybe they left him for dead. I don't know. I'm kind of interested to see the aftermath of that. So we also have Casey, who's dealing with Monica and Tate. It seems that Casey is going and is looking for everybody at the dinner table, and no one is there. So Casey's telling the guy who is to normally make their food for them, it's like, well, hey, like, make me a plate for both Monica and Tate. So Casey goes to this room where both Monica and Tate are kind of like super glued into this room, and they don't want to leave because of what it all like transpired here, and that they could have died. Tate is under the bed and he won't get out. We eventually have Casey drag him from out of the bed, and Casey is hugging on to Tate, telling him it's like, well, hey, like, your worst nightmare, like, you faced it, like, it's over, and like, and now like, just go and eat your food. And so Monica is just very emotional and it gets to the point where Monica is like, well, we came here for you and we lived here for you and we hate you. I hate you. And so, like, it would, like, if I were Casey, I would just like, you know what, I just don't want to hear this right now. Like, like, the worst thing that I think Casey would want to do is have to do the work that he has to do to just come home and, like, like, deal with this, of all things. So, we have in the next episode that Casey doesn't know how to make things right with Monica and Tate. And so we have John who's telling Casey, it's like, well, you should probably figure out how to deal with that. And Casey's just like, I don't know how. And John's like, neither do I, but you gotta deal with it somehow, or you're gonna lose them. And Casey's like, well, I think I'm already gonna lose them. But also, there's something that I'm gonna get to, but I'll get to that soon. Like with that whole conversation that they have, there's more to it, but like I'll get to that later. So Casey goes on to talk to Monica and tells her, it's like, well, how about you go to the reservation? You go and you see your grandfather Felix, and you live with him for a while. So that way you can kind of get back on the reservation, and like you can kind of like you just need time away from here. And Monica crazily is to pack all her stuff and leave. And so Casey's like, well, hey, I'll be back soon. It's just we need time away. And John's like, okay, like, all right. So now, so John, or no, wait, let's go and let's talk about Mo. So Mo is to go on and find one of these militia members, and Mo is to put him in some, I think, barn by his house, as he's going to go and get some roast beef sandwich. And so Mo is telling his wife, it's like, well, hey, why does my son end up getting roast beef and I get peanut butter and jelly? Because evidently his son doesn't like peanut butter and jelly, so he gets roast beef. So, but they end up switching their lunches. But Mo just turns around and gives this meal to this militia member. It's like, hey, eat up quick. So Mo is to go on and with Rainwater to see John, to hand him over this militia member, and is to also tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, this is the guy leading the charge in prison, of all things, and like, this is the guy who's this militia member. And so John's kind of thumbing through and he's like, okay, this sounds legitimate, because I think John can trust Rainwater a lot. Like, I don't think Rainwater is trying to swerve or curve or whatever, because I just don't think that that's Rainwater right now. It would be interesting to have Rainwater be doing that, to just be like, oh my god, wouldn't it be crazy if Rainwater was doing this the whole time and then was trying to push it off as like a culprit of someone else? Wouldn't that be a really creative story if Rainwater wanted to get rid of John anyways, and thinking that like the closer and closer he can keep John, the better, and then just eventually just take John out that way? We never know, or we won't know until it's time. So John is to go and take this militia member, and he takes him out to Wyoming, the train station that they always call him. And so John is to give this militia member an opportunity for him to live by giving him this gun, and he tells him that this gun can only fire a certain way. So the moment that I see here is honestly like Mr. Brooks. If anybody's ever seen the Kevin Costner movie Mr. Brooks, where we have Kevin Costner and we have Dane Cook, and so we have Dane Cook at the end of that movie wanting to shoot Kevin Costner, and what eventually ends up happening is Kevin Costner is to turn around and say, well, you know what, like, I was kind of waiting around to see if you were going to shoot me, and like while like you had your gun in your hand, like I was thinking about my life and how I kind of want to see it through. So like I was going to, like, if I was to think to just have you go ahead and kill me and shoot me and whatever, I would have actually given you a gun to fire a bullet, but this guy had no bullets in this gun. And so Kevin Costner just beats Dane Cook to death, I think, with a shovel, from what I remember from that movie, and then decides to not like go and die off. So we end up having this militia member who is to go on and try to kill John, but eventually John gets the better of this guy and is to, of course, kill him off. Like, I don't know why he gave him this chance here. I would have just killed him and just been done with it. But, like, weirdly, I guess John is just wanting to risk his life for what? For what here? Just to, like, put up a much more, like, harrowing like scene. I don't know. Like, I don't know what that. I don't know what this. Why he was even like attempting to do any of this. So now John is to go on and take this information he was given from Mo and Rainwater to Casey, to tell Casey, it's like, well, hey, take this information to Jamie. And Casey's like, well, why don't you do it? Like, you have legs, you have arms, go. And John's like, no, like I want to just kind of see, like, until this resolves and that we find out that it's not Jamie, then I will come back to him. I will see him. I will speak to him again. But for right now, like, no, like I don't want to talk to him right now. And so, like, you're going to have to be like the middleman to go and talk to your brother. Or technically your brother. Who knows who he is anymore. But it seems that both Casey and both Jamie both tell one another they love one another. So, like, they're still, like, Casey is to still continue to cement to Jamie, it's like, hey, I love you, brother. And Jamie's like, well, I love you. And there, it's like that weird kind of awkward exchange of like, hey, like, please don't F me over here. And so, but I really like what's going on between Casey and Jamie here. I really like, I wish there was more of it, but like, I'm okay with what we get. But I really like, it just kind of feels weird that Jamie is just always off on his own with Garrett. And we, of course, end up having the one moment where Jamie is to just be so happy that he was to have bought his place, and he's getting ready for work, and he says that he's late. And Garrett's like, well, hey, like, I'll go and I'll rustle up some grub. Like, I'll go and I'll make dinner. And Jamie's like, well, hey, thanks for that. And Garrett's like, well, yeah, like, just me making food is just kind of the one kind of peaceful things of life, and so on and so forth. And so we have Jamie who's thanking Garrett for all that he's done. And Garrett's like, well, hey, like, you finally, like, you had the strength all along to do this. I just helped you to, like, find that out, that you had this strength all along to do what needed to be done here. So So Jamie is talking to Casey, and so Jamie is to mention that he has still been fighting for this family. That there's a lot of stuff that he kind of kept, like he had to go and not talk or not call or not anything, but still help out this family because John was to have security at his hospital, and Jamie was the one doing that. Jamie also was to try and protect Casey from all the stuff that he had done, and from like the very first episode of season 4, where Casey went off and was going and killing all these militia members, ramming into this car, like, which was kind of a very risky and like wrong thing to do, even though Casey was to justify it. Jamie is just like, well, like you need to realize what the difference of what difference things are, like in your perspective and in law. So so Jamie was trying to do the right things and was trying to help this family out without Casey actually knowing it. And Jamie had to explain why Jamie was away for so long because he didn't want to be in collusion of of what had transpired, and like him taking a distance thing, like, which I thought was so cool. I'm like, it makes this person look so like shifty or so guilty, but then we turn around and there's a whole reason for that. That seems so smart, so intelligent. And we also had that moment where Jamie was saying, it's like, you know what? I don't want to see Beth anymore unless it's like her deathbed or in court. Like I don't want to see her anywhere else. So and I was like, "Oh my god, that's so awesome." Uh, that like Jamie and Beth may never again have some kind of talk here. But we still don't know about Jamie and his possible baby on the way. Like we still don't know about that, and I want to have that cleared up sometime soon. Like I want to have maybe either Jamie finally make amends with that, or Jamie go on to like I want to see what happens with that. Like where's the where the story goes with that story with the whole Christine and the baby still, because possibly we had for completely forgotten about all that. So so speaking of forgot about, we also have John who is going on and talking to Jimmy because Jimmy is going to be leaving soon to go with Travis because John is to have all of the guys that he'd hired with Travis's help to do all these rodeo contests, and John had spent millions of dollars, and now he's going to see what he had paid for on the ranch. And so we have it where Jimmy is to be this guy that is to be the stick in the mud, or like some kind of like Jimmy is to kind of come in there, and Travis and all of the rest of the guys are to just give him a hard time. They just don't like him. And so John is going and telling Jimmy, it's like, well, hey, like, remember that when you go anywhere, like, you're going to represent this ranch. You're going to represent Yellowstone. And, like, think about that before you do anything. And, like, also, like think about your life while you're out there, uh like if you're really wanting to to be with Mia, and like if you really want to rodeo, and so like you're gonna take this time to figure a lot of things out. So Jimmy is to go on and he is to start to lose his equipment, his like kind of braces and stuff for his body, because Travis is to say like, "Hey man, this is like an expensive like car here. Like I'm not just gonna have you have all that equipment on you and mess up my seats." So Jimmy is to go on and have to like rope up his like his clothes and his whatever to just tie them onto this thing. So we go on and we have Travis riding with Jimmy, and we of course have them consistently like butting heads to where it seems that Travis is starting getting tired while driving, and Jimmy's like, "Well, hey, I can take the wheel," and Travis is like, "No, I drive." And Jimmy's like, "Well, hey, like I can," and Travis is like, "You know how expensive this truck is, this trailer is, everything inside of that trailer is." Like, and he starts like notching down every single price of everything. And when somebody is to want to get on his horse, we of course have Travis saying like, "This is a $300,000 horse. Like, if you want to go and jump on this horse, like then give me $300,000." It's like, because this guy knows to the cent like how expensive all these things are, and so that's the thing that I can enjoy a lot more about Travis, and it's making this guy a very intelligent character if he wasn't already. And so that this guy had like to like really get all these skills and be really good at what he does. So we have, of course, Travis and Jimmy. And so Travis is telling Jimmy to shave all of his facial hair off. And Jimmy's saying, like, "Well, my girlfriend likes it." And if I were to have been Travis, I would have said, it's like, "Well, is your girlfriend coming with you?" No. Then. Because evidently, when Jimmy's going to Texas, evidently they don't like facial hair. So, like, shave all of it off, I guess. Because evidently Jimmy looks homeless. So So Travis is going on about the movie Roadhouse, where he ends up mentioning that like, "Hey, I'll sleep when I'm dead," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's the Sam Elliott line that he delivers in that movie," and so Travis is to mention that he loves that film, and I can understand that because we have kind of Patrick Swayze going into a bar, saving this bar from all of these unsavory characters, and he does it with martial arts, and like we end up having that one scene where like Patrick Swayze is just kind of doing his like karate, and like he's doing all these moves just in the middle of the forest in basically nowhere, and we're just kind of seeing him do this, and it looks really cool. So I can understand where Travis is to say this about this film. So Travis is to mention it's like, man, I would love when I'm much older to like to look like Sam Elliott, but have like Patrick Swayze's hair, and so we have Travis going on and on about Roadhouse, and I guess Jimmy has never seen it, and so. But we have Travis going and telling Jimmy to go and sleep because he's definitely going to need it. And so we have Jimmy who ends up getting dropped off at this one place, and he is to be more clean shaven. And so he ends up getting dropped off, and there isn't any heartfelt goodbyes because they don't give a crap. So, uh, so we have at one point where Jimmy is going and watching on as all these guys are to do their business, are to basically win all of these competitions and get all these big fat checks. Jimmy, of course, is to want to put a letter in with these checks so that way these people can mail all these things to Yellowstone. And they're like, well, hey, like, what is it? Is it the Yellowstone or is it the Dutton Ranch? And it's like, well, it's one and the same. It's the Yellowstone Dutton Ranch. So I'm just kind of thinking it's like, well, hey, like, uh, hopefully they don't F something up here. So we have Jimmy who's tempted to write a letter to Mia, but nothing seems to come out. And the girl's asking, it's like, well, hey, how about that letter? And Jimmy's just like, well, just send the checks. I don't really care. Like, so Jimmy walks off, realizing that maybe it's time for him to let Mia go and see where Mia is to head from here. Which really, I think Mia is just kind of done with. She's still at the ranch, but I'm thinking she's probably just done with it at this point. And because we have her kind of like when we do see her in the show, we have her kind of like complaining about things or just kind of mentioning it's like, well, hey, like maybe we should get on the road, maybe we should leave, maybe we should rodeo, maybe we should go somewhere. And Laramie is kind of the opposite because Laramie is to be going after this guy named Walker, and they're going at it in the trailer consistently, I guess, sleeping in some trailer. And so Lloyd is more and more just getting so severely irritated with Walker, and it might be a combination of things, just like jealousy or just the fact that this guy should be dead, or it could just be any number of like things just kind of building up where maybe Walker is just too confident of a character. And to where Walker is going and talking to Jimmy and saying like, hey, where you're going is heaven on earth. Like, man, I would give anything to go back to where you are heading now. And so we we end up having our characters let's go and talk about Beth. So Beth is to kind of see Carter, and Beth is like, hey, like I'm gonna have him leave for the day to go and get him some nice boots or nice hat or just some nice clothes because it seems like he has nothing. And so Rip is, of course, like having Beth like tell him like that Carter's leaving for the day, and we have Rip who's just like, no, he's not. Like he's gonna stay right here. And Beth's like, no, he's leaving. And so Rip is like, okay, like just have fun with your pet. And Beth's like, what did you just say? And Rip is like, yeah, like you're treating him like much more like a pet than a human, and so just have fun with your pet. Go get him nice things and whatever. So Beth goes on and is to take this kid off shopping. And so all of a sudden, this kid, at first, we have Beth who's kind of choosing certain pairs of jeans or a hat. And Carter decides that he just wants this shirt. And he doesn't care about boots. He doesn't care about whatever. He just wants this really nice shirt. And it's like, dude, you should be grateful for anything that you're given here. Like grateful meaning that like if a person is to say, okay, here's a hat, then you'll just be like, okay, I'll take it. Like he like as long as you are to like what you're given, like it's still being like grateful, but I don't like there's a whole lot of sticky situation with that where like it's nice that you're to get this gift, but it's also just like, well, hey, like you probably should have asked me like what I would have wanted from that one thing. Like if you're to tell me like, oh, hey, here's this hat, it's like, do you like white hats? Do you like black hats? Do you like gray hats? I'm like, oh yeah, like I like like if you're gonna give me this thing, then I like this kind of color of thing. Then it's like, oh, okay. And then, like, so that way you can, like, if you're going to get a gift, get something that you like. But also, we have kind of Carter throwing a wrench in that gift to just be like, well, like, instead of completely going into a vastly different direction of gift, like, I am wanting to just get this shirt that really doesn't seem all that important when you could have gotten something like a pair of boots, a nice pair of boots, or like a hat that can kind of like, those things are much more effective than a random shirt that just doesn't make sense. So eventually we just have Beth, who's to just tell Carter it's like that he's ungrateful for what Beth is doing here, and Sarge just kind of like slaps him up. And we have this one woman who's like videotaping this, like, hey, hey, like, you're seriously, like, child abuse. I have this video documenting this. And so Beth is just like taking and ripping away this woman's phone and smashing it into the ground. And so we have it where Beth is to immediately dissect this woman and like tell her who she is to her face. And so realizing this woman isn't really going to do anything, and so Beth goes and takes Carter, or Beth just goes and leaves, and then Carter is to follow after her, taking off this shirt because Beth is to have demanded it numerous times, for then Carter to realize he has no money for this shirt, so he takes it off. So Carter is to make it into the car, and the car's locked, so Carter's like, hey, come on, like, I'm sorry, for looking a gift horse in the mouth. But so Beth and Carter have this like exchange between one another, which you would think that it would get like that whole thing there would get resolved, but we just turn around and still have Carter still in trouble because now like Rip is gonna have to go and deal with Carter. So we have Beth who's going and telling Carter, it's like, well, considering this kid will eventually need to make money at some point, and the only way that this guy is ever going to get rich is not going to be because of like intellect or intelligence, or like, this guy isn't ever going to become a book smart person. So eventually he's going to have to street smart way, or street smart wise, go on to become rich. And that basically this kid is gonna have to suck a lot of dick to eventually become rich. And Carter's like, oh, well, is that how you got how you are? Um, because Beth is telling him, it's like, well, you can inherit it, which you aren't gonna like. That's not gonna happen for you. You're not gonna inherit being rich. It's not gonna happen. But then Beth just starts to notch down every single way that this kid could get rich. And so, but it ends up coming down to like this kid has to like street smart his way to becoming like a person that has some kind of resemblance of money. And so after this whole, like, after Beth talking to this kid, and it still feels like he hasn't 100% learned. And here's the thing, we kind of have Rip, who had been in this kid's shoes. So you would think if anybody could really talk to him, like, it would be Rip. And you would think immediately Rip would just be like, dude, like, you haven't had, like, the worst of the worst. And, like, I don't think that this kid has hit rock bottom yet. And so, like, this kid is like transitioned well. Like this kid has never actually been homeless. Like this kid has never um like 100% felt desperation, and so this kid should be grateful that that hasn't happened yet, is really what we're kind of getting at here. So Beth comes, of course, home, and she is wanting a number of shots, and Rip is to already have all this prepared, knowing that she's going to have a bad day, because Rip is to know how exactly this was going to break down. And so we end up having like Rip like having this kind of like face of "I told you so," but he's like, like I would actually tell her. So, but then we eventually have Beth like kind of going on and sitting on Rip's lap and saying that Rip is going to regret that Beth couldn't actually give Rip a legitimate child. And Rip's like, "No, I won't." And she's like, "Well, just wait. Just wait. Eventually we'll get there." So we still haven't even talked much about the wedding yet. We still haven't even like gone on and have them like starting putting things to paper or whatever. But Beth is eventually going and talking about a wedding to John at some point. But she's also mentioning that John needs to go and get a woman. To where John is like, "You know what? Like you and me, our man to man like talks, like it's starting to get a little too far here." It's starting to get a little awkward, because Beth is saying like, "Hey, you really need a woman right now." Let's just say, and so John is like, "Oh, you know, I like our conversations, but I don't like our conversations." So, so yeah, so uh, like I'm trying to perfectly all pace this out, or perfectly all mention everything, and I think that does cover quite a bit of episode 3. Uh, we also have it in the next following episode. We have Caroline Warner who comes back into things and is to offer Beth a job. And she's going to offer her a position to save Yellowstone, because Caroline is wanting to find like a Breckenridge, like a big massive thing of like, you know how like Minnesota would possibly have like the Mall of America, where normally like people from all over the world would go to Minnesota for Mall of America. We have, of course, Caroline mentioning that Caroline wants a place like that for Montana. And so she's hoping that Beth can scout out how to get that and eventually have these market equity people just continue to find these kind of big things for one state, so that way they can not go after Yellowstone. So, and we have it where Beth is saying, it's like, "Well, hey, I'll only work with you if I can basically get your shares of Schwartz and Meyer. Like I want that thing. I want that place." And Caroline is saying, it's like, "Well, you just want to fire Bob." And Beth is like, "No. I want to bankrupt him and leave his kids on welfare. And if you F with me, like, I'm going to do the same thing to you. Like I've done to so many others. Like I'm going to leave carnage in my wake. And smile while I do it. So Beth is putting this offer up because she knows that is a thing that they won't want to accept for Beth to do that. Because Caroline is saying that Beth is the perfect corporate raider and that they're wanting to like hire her to eventually go and find other things to save the Yellowstone and save it from possibly certain death. Because Beth is going on and saying it's like, well, hey, like my father has this dream of Yellowstone still existing, so I'm going to defend it until I die, kind of thing. So I'm gonna like that's my Alamo. Like I'm gonna like I'm gonna keep this thing alive until my father is to die. But then as soon as he does, like you'll be the first one I call. So yeah, so eventually Beth is going and telling John about this offer, and Beth is kind of breaking it down as John was to go and be the livestock commissioner so he could have control. And Beth is going on and doing the same thing by possibly taking this position so that way they can control market equities and stop them from trying to go after the Yellowstone. And so Beth is like thinking like there could be an opportunity here uh, to eventually get some kind of control against these people and work them away from continuing to come after the Yellowstone. So we're going to kind of see how that works out. That's kind of an interesting kind of part here. But yeah, so we have Jamie who is to get this paperwork from Casey that is to be the file on the guy who is to supposedly be this leader of this militia. And so Jamie is to go and talk and see where Jamie's head's at about this whole thing. And Jamie's like, well, yeah, like I can help out. Like I can go and figure out a way to kind of deal with this. And I'll send like a state attorney and this and that. And we also had Jamie who is going on and talking to some other gal, talking about legal precedents and so on and so forth. That if they're going to go to court with this person, the judge like hopefully doesn't want to get reelected, and because it's going to create whatever Jamie is to want to put together against this other attorney is to uncreate 6,000 jobs and is to like have somebody not get reelected, some judge reelected, and so on and so forth. So Jamie is going on and talking to this woman and is to, of course, mention that they will probably lose their case and then like they will go and lose it via prejudice, and then they will get sued because of all. And so like there's so many Jamie finds so many like things that is to force this person to not want to go against what Jamie's doing, because Jamie's really putting in all the work here. So when Casey is to talk to Jamie, like Jamie is thinking about all the legal stuff that is going to have to go into like putting this whole thing together, and Casey's just like, no, you just do it. You just take care of this because I love you, brother. And Jamie's like, I love you. And then we have Jamie thumbing through this record thing, and he is to find out that supposedly his father was tied to this militia guy, that there could have been a reason why Garrett maybe had called this militia guy to take care of the Duttons. And Jamie's like, oh my god. Like, so we figure out that Garrett is to have possibly been made the call to kill off the Duttons. So we'll see how that plays out. So, I want to try to think here if there's anything that I had forgotten about here. We finally have Lloyd and Walker go on and fight it out in the bunkhouse, because we have Teeter, who goes on and makes this stew of sorts that is to basically be like all kinds of stuff from cow, and they end up saying like, hey man, I don't care, this is good. And so all of a sudden Walker is going and giving Lloyd his food, and Walker's like, hey Lloyd, you want to dance, bro? So all of a sudden, like, Lloyd and Walker are fighting one another. Rip is to make his way into the bunkhouse and is to, like, pull these guys apart. And so now Rip is beating the crap out of Lloyd, like, flinging him over this table. And then he goes on and is to, like, kind of grab on to Walker's, like, hey, if you want to fight anybody, fight me. I'll fight you all day long. And, like, Rip is just disappointed in Lloyd because Lloyd knows better. And so when Lloyd is to get up the next day, like, he has this black eye and he's like, God, like, we also end up having this one moment where Lloyd was to be kind of leading these field hands, and all this cattle was all to mostly have pink eye. And so Lloyd goes on and is trying to think that to go through the chute and try to deal with this pink eye situation. But all of a sudden, John and Rip come in and they're telling Lloyd, like, no, just do it in the pasture. Just kind of separate all of them. And Lloyd's like, well, hey, like, some of these girls, they can't rope. And some of the, like, Lloyd is just kind of coming up with an excuse for why, like, he was going to do it some other way. And so it's like, well, yeah, like, if there's an easier way to do things, then that's probably just the way that some people would want to do stuff. But John and Rip are kind of worried that eventually all of this cattle will eventually just get infected if they do it that way. So they go and they rope this cattle down, and they go and inject this cattle so that way they don't all get pink eye. And so they end up kind of getting it done that way. So, so I'm trying to think here if there's anything left that I have to seemingly cover here. If I don't, there's always this thing called a rebuttal. Because I feel like there's a billion things that I didn't say here. Let me know in the comments below if there's something that I probably forgot about, because it feels like there is a lot of little stories here, and there might be something that I might have forgot about, because that's bound to happen. But I think I covered a bulk of everything. So yeah. It still doesn't feel like Kobe and Teeter are still in this relationship, even though they kissed once. It still doesn't feel like they had cemented this relationship. But yeah, I think that's all that I have to say about this one. I think I've covered. I always have this kind of second guessing thing, which takes me forever to end an episode, because I'm always like, what did I forget about? What was the one thing? But yeah, so I think to solve that, I'm just gonna get out of here and just say that everything was perfectly said. No, but I'm gonna get out of here anyways. I have fun with these little stories, but again, it's also just so much filler. Is what it really feels like. So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.